I thought I would get a round of applause for Mr. Eltimokede. Thank you very much. Now let's come over to Dr. Chaudhuri. The World Bank is one of Nigeria's important development partners. In fact, your motto is fighting poverty. Over there in Washington, you see it on the floor. And sometimes when I pass, I'll be like, how long have the World Bank been fighting poverty? Over 70 years. I hope you're so successful. But you assist Nigeria in, in many analytic outputs like the Nigeria Development Update, the country memorandum, and all of that. My question to you is, what type of policy reforms have proven the most difficult for Nigeria to implement? I see Shubham is winking at me. Nancy, you want to ask me that question? What type of policy reforms are really difficult for us to implement in order to diversify and restructure, like Governor El-Rufai mentioned earlier, based on the analytical outputs as well as the advisory work that you've done? Are there comparator countries such as Indonesia, Brazil, India, that we can learn from? What have they done that would also make us overcome some of these reform constraints?
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. And thank you, Zainab and Waziri, for including me on this. I mean, I'm actually wondering. Governor El-Rufai said he's wondering why he is. He's just being modest. I truly am wondering why I'm here. I mean, in part, look, usually the World Bank is brought in to provide this international experience, but I want to note that you've done that in the book and in the presentation, and you were at the World Bank at one point. So, but let me turn to the question that Nancy asked. Look, I can answer that question in technical economic terms, or I can answer that in more political terms. So okay. Let me take the first, technical economic terms, and let me just take two countries as points of reference. They happen to be two countries that I know the best. I'm from India, so I know India, and I spent 5 years in Indonesia. But I also think that those two countries, India and Indonesia, are in some ways the best kind of comparator or peer countries for Nigeria in terms of being large, ethnically, religiously diverse, noisy, multi-party democracies. Indonesia and Nigeria are even closer. They have a similar history of 30 years of military rule, a transition to this noisy democracy in the late 90s, etc. So those two countries. In economic terms, at some point in both Indonesia and India, two basic facts or kind of realities of policymaking and development, I think, were agreed on by the elites. One is macrofiscal, kind of core macrofiscal management. In Indonesia, this was triggered. There was a period of that in the military rule during the Suharto era, but more than anything else, it was triggered by the 1998 Asian financial crisis, where Indonesia had to go to the IMF. And that was at the national level, whether or not people supported Suharto or sympathized with him, this was a thing as a national trauma. And since then, if there's one thing that the political elites agree on, it's the need for proper macrofiscal management. Does not mean, everything's solved, but that one thing that we are not going to get into that kind of macrofiscal crisis again is something that's shared by all the elites. Second thing I would say, and then here let me refer to the example of India, is a basic understanding or commitment or recognition, I would say, of the role of private investment in a nation's development. No country has eliminated poverty without private firms growing and creating the jobs that pull people out of subsistence agriculture, pull people out of kind of hustling on this, informal sector. Okay, it is always private firms growing and investing.